Hi. So I've got a view here that won't let me see everybody right at the same time. So as I speak here, if we'll have plenty of time for discussion at the end, but if there's anything that you want to say or need to say, or you can just unmute yourself and pop in.
My screen has a big label across it. It says this meeting is being recorded, and then underneath it says continue or leave meeting. Should I press continue? Because I can't see people now.
Yeah, try see what happens when you press continue. I'm trying not to have you guys
Yeah,
being seen, so
yeah, um, yeah, it worked. It's working here now.
okay. Everybody else okay on board? All right. So, um, and if there's any announcements, we can do them at the end too when I end this recording piece. Um, so the reason I wanted this came up for me, and I'm guessing that for some of you it's come up too. It's is a little bit about the whole transition from all this time that we spent in very limited relationship, not seeing people in person, and the issues with feeling kind of removed. Even if we were around people, we felt removed, and now that's come to an end or coming to an end, and it's both wonderful and a little strange for me. And one of the things for me just happened at the same time that I had all these gatherings with people that I haven't seen for not just this last year, but a lot of them for many years. And they've all gotten older and they're all look different. And I realize that I'm different and the relationships are different. And so it brought up all these sort of interests and questions in my mind about what happens in relationship and what is it. And so I've I've been thinking about it and listened to a couple of talks, and so I want to share my insights, my questions, and then we can talk together about it. So this is a quote from Sam Harris. If any of you know who he is, he's a kind of a I'm going to say he's kind of a snarky guy. He's a teacher and a philosopher and but he said most of us are far wiser than we appear to be. He said because on one level, um, where wisdom is just nothing more than a profound ability to follow one's own advice. And that reminded me that there's always this story about the Dharma teacher who became enlightened by his own Dharma talk. And so we have this wisdom, and part of what relationship does is to see what we do with that wisdom when we meet someone else, whether it's someone who's like-minded or very different or whatever. It tweaks that. It checks it out, and sometimes more often maybe than a lot of us would like, it really triggers things that make it difficult to have relationships. It's kind of like the origins of this, I think, are in psychology in early childhood, in our growing up, and in our experiences later on, where we get hurt or we get scared, or as we're children, we have limited options for what to do when things go wrong, or when we feel like scared, or that we're we have all these feelings that come up, sometimes inappropriately, but it's what we feel, and that need to feel safe comes up. So we develop coping mechanisms, and those coping mechanisms, they work for us. I mean, we get through what we're getting through, but they insulate us to some extent from other people. We insulate and protect our own hearts, and we do whatever we can not to get that protection broken or pierced, or to let things through. And yet, the paradox here is that in order to be free, in order to be at one with other people, or even to have a deep relationship, we have to be able to open our hearts. And that means we have to be able to be real, and not just protected, not just accommodate whatever. I was talking to some friends a couple of days ago about remembering that I had this image in my mind for a long time about making a trek across a journey. It's kind of the journey to get free, and going along just fine until I would come to this mountain. And so I would journey along in pursuit of freedom, but I'd come to this mountain, and the mountain was high, and it was scary, and I would just decide to turn around and go back. So this is kind of the image of not wanting to face my fears, or the things that I had to confront in order, and still have to confront. I'm still on the mountain somewhere, but at least I realize that I have the only way to get true communication with myself and with others is to face whatever it is that scares me. So so here we are, back with family, and back with friendships, and back with old people that we haven't had maybe much contact with for a while. And as soon as we do that, the other thing, I was listening to talk and remembering that there was a man I knew early in my practice who was a monk. He had been a monk for 20 years and come out, and he was in the world again, and he used to come to the meditation group, and I kind of heard came to a class we did together and things, but it was too much for him to be in relationship to everyone in the world, and he finally just went back to the monastery. So the challenge of relationships is really it's really a big one. It's you could call it grist for the mill. It's a way of finding out what triggers us, what scares us, what makes us want to retreat from the mountain. And so what happens is, as we relate to others, things trigger us, and we experience fear and anger and etc. And what happens with that is we become kind of reactive. We move into reactive patterns and habitual patterns. We have these habits, and so what we do with those is how one of the ways we learn. And Tara Brock, and so there's this loop that we go on, and you probably, I bet you all can identify certain patterns in your relationships to yourself, but also mostly to others, about certain things that people might say or do or communicate that just set you off, and you find yourself in a reactive pattern. And Tara Brock calls this a relational trance, a trance that when we can't see who we really are or who others really are. And so we tend to start seeing ourselves as either the victim or the boss or the rescuer, whatever. And it's addictive, and it limits us from fully being ourselves. We're hanging on to patterns, to identities, where another thing that we do is we create an identity for those people around us in our lives, for our partners or for our friends or for our parents, brothers, sisters, children, neighbors, whoever that we have much relationship with. Sometimes people we don't know, but in people that we're relating to, we develop these personas. This is who you are, and of course, and this is who I am, and of course, what that does is it limits. You know, we relate to who we think that person is, out of who either we think we are or who we think we're supposed to be, what we think people are supposed to see in us. You know, I'm the grandma, or the advisor, or whatever. So we have to, that's one of the things we watch for. So these routines show up in all aspects of our lives. We're kind of trying to accommodate what others expect or want, and not always what's really coming from our hearts. And in that way, we're cut off from the real depth of who we are. And the core of the Buddhist teachings is to cause no harm. And the deepest expression of our Buddha nature is reverence for life. So in order to do these things in the best way, we have to wake up from the trance. And in doing that, we have to look for our patterns. Now, one of the things that I think is really interesting, for me at least, and I'd be interested when we get to talking to hear how this has been for you, but over this last period of time where I have had more space, more time to just listen to myself, to notice, be aware of my patterns, be aware of what triggers me, what is that. So on the one hand, I have more awareness, and on the other hand, less opportunity to see what happens when I get back into a lot of relationships again. So we inquire, and we can look at some of these patterns. For example, there's a fight or flight or freeze are the ways that we react when we get triggered by something. Someone says something that triggers this reactivity in ourselves. And so when that happens, we move into things like, so in fighting, we're blaming others for not being the way they should be, the way we want them to be, the way we are trying to make them be. And it sometimes comes in the form of complaining, or it comes in the form of pushing people away or being aggressive. It comes in the way of kind of dismissing the other because we can't deal with whatever has triggered that in ourselves. And with flight, it's like there's there's this feeling of hurt, afraid, anger that we seek to pacify with that. So we accommodate and we shift to a form that's least likely to cause trouble. We end up by justifying ourselves, defending our position or our okayness. We cover over and defend to avoid taking any responsibility for whatever's going on with us. And what I'm referring to here is not necessarily that all this is true in every case, but that we this is where we can investigate. We can notice what pattern am I following, and what is that seems familiar. You know, the familiar feeling of running away, or noticing this, maybe a little sense of embarrassment or shame, or rejection, and in that trigger we move into this pattern of fight or flight, or freeze. You know, so we can in freezing we just shut down. We shut down, and we stop listening, and we stop connecting altogether. So none of those are particularly healthy. Those are all, but they served us when we needed them. And now, with our practice, with our understanding, with our maturity and wisdom, we have the opportunity to change those. So one of the questions that comes up about this is, why do we stay so hooked? I mean, even when we know better, why do we stay so hooked? And one reason is that the emotions that flare up in us, they happen so fast. So the reaction on an emotional level comes 10 times as fast at the part of the brain that says, wait a minute, that don't take it personally. So the speed of our limbic system is great, but it's not so great that when we're in a situation with someone close to us and something triggers us and the adrenaline begins to flow in the same way it does in a crisis situation, we start defending or doing whatever our natural, our habitual pattern has become. So another reason is that these are deeply, deeply entrenched habits that we have. They can start before we learn words, before we learn how to think, before we really think and talk. But what we do is we know what to do to cry or get angry or curl up in a little ball when we're very little. So these patterns are there for a long time, and they're well established, and they're deeply grooved into our brains. So this is a real challenge. And another reason is that we can have this habit of thinking that we're right, that somehow that story is that we're right, and it's very compelling. It's satisfying to feel righteous. And so there's this, this person has no right to blame me. It's just and you begin to feed that story of being right and cherry picking what happened in the exchange that justifies your rightness, and it begins that looping and feeding. Whoops. Do you see me? I just disappeared here. Oh, there. Um, uh, so this feeling of righteousness, and the thing is, it imprisons us. This all imprisons us. It imprisons us in the story of who we are trying to protect. And in that imprisonment, we don't really get either in ourselves to experience the deep truth of who we are, or and the deep truth of who the other person is. So the opposite of that, of course, that is to say, I'm wrong, I'm bad, I keep screwing up, and then we feel less than, then we feel separate, and we're cut off in a different but still deeply destructive way. And it's important to have compassion for ourselves and to remember that when these patterns set in, when they are developed in our journey, in our story, they were early on usually, and they were at the time the best option that we had. So I think I've told this story before, but it's a nice metaphor for this. In Thailand, a number of years ago, there was a big weather pattern that went through the area. And in Thailand, there was and is, I think, this revered and enormous Buddha statue that had been there for hundreds of years, many hundreds of years. And it wasn't particularly beautiful. It was clay and plaster, but it was loved for its endurance and for the fact that it had survived all these years. And storms and political changes, and there was the statue hanging in there. But this year that we're talking about, there was a very dry season, and a crack appeared in the statue. And so this monk went out to kind of try to see what they could do, and he was looking at the crack, and he put his flashlight in, and it shone back at him. So he looked a few other places, and what they discovered was that this clay statue was developed and padded over a solid gold statue that had been the original Buddha that had been put up there, but because they wanted to protect it from all the political storms, early on they had put this clay over it. And so it was protected from difficult times, but its beauty was locked inside. So it's a real metaphor for what we do to ourselves in this process of protecting our hearts, and we tend to lock inside some of this. So how do we find our way out of this trance? Let's see, something I wanted to read you here, if I can find it. Well, so just another little piece of this is that not all of us, but lots of people who follow, who get involved with meditation and mindfulness, Buddhism, tend to be kind of internal, introverted people, and they're more comfortable in solitary relationships, and the good part about that is, and again going back to this last year, that in solitary contemplation, mindfulness, awareness, just the practices of having the space and time to see what's here, what is this, who am I, that phrase that I was repeating in the meditation, we we can begin to see that gold, that wisdom, that insight that's kind of been peppered or uh, padded over to protect us. And sometimes when we do then meet with other people, it can be very intense. There was a, a retreat I went to years ago where we did this practice, and it was you you were paired up with another person. I was paired up with someone I didn't know at all, and all you were asked to do was to sit across from each other. Maybe some of you have done this, and just stare into the other person's eyes for, I don't know how long it really was. It seemed like a lifetime, and and it was very intense. I mean, it felt kind of almost like just like everything was stripped away, and there was this intense intimacy. And I was on this retreat, and it was a man that I did this with. I felt a little shy to even look at him again afterwards because this intensity of this looking. And so we don't know, we're not used to really connecting with other people. You know, next time you're having a conversation with somebody, just notice how long you tend to keep your eyes fixed on that person. We tend to kind of shy away after a little bit. So in the Quaker tradition, religion, which I followed for many years, there's a kind of injunction that is, we're asked to speak to that of God in every person, and and to listen to that of God from what they say. And that's kind of this another way to talk about breaking through the things that keep us from connecting with each other. We're protecting the heart. And another thing about this is, so we know what the three characteristics of existence are, that we of impermanence, of suffering, and of holding on to the sense of self. And letting go of the sense of self is, to the extent that we can let go of the sense of self, we are going to be able to have a true and rich communication with another person, because we won't be defending. The self is this constructed identity that comes out of our conditioning. And when we have moments and experiences where we can drop that and let go of that, we get, and if we're with another person who can do that, we can have a true and intimate relationship and connection. And we're let go of, and when we let go of the sense of self, we let go of these trigger points, these tender spots, these places that we're afraid to, or we can reveal them at least. We're not trying to divert attention away from what we really experience, from our story. So yeah, and the other piece of this is that, so we have a story we've created around ourselves, and then we have a story, to a greater or lesser degree, that we've created around each other, especially the people that we are friends with or know, or based on, have you ever had this experience where you meet somebody for the first time, and they remind you of someone else, and now you think they're going to be just like that other person, and you have all the story around them that has nothing to do with them except that something in the way they smile or the way they look or how tall they are or how old they are is reminds you of someone else. So we create this and we turn other people into fixed beings. So one of the things that that is a really important part of meditation and mindfulness practice is creating the pause, this gap that we make between the stimulus and the response. And you can see that even though we get triggered, so someone says something or does something that triggers a response, and we can hear that response in our head. He always does this, or, why couldn't he just be on time, or whatever it is. And we're, as the expression goes, we're loaded for bear. We're ready to fire back at somebody from what they've said or done. But if we are working with this idea of the pause, we can ask ourselves that question: what is this? What's going on in me? And how does this feel? The Buddha said, it's like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. So when we embrace our anger or hatred or whatever and make that the focus, we're the ones that are suffering. The other person, they're not doing it. So we have to slow down, and this limbic system has been triggered, and we want to go and we want to act. But if you slow down, you can access this inner wisdom that we have, the truth. And we have a chance in this pause to step out of this relationship trance. And we can look at what's truly going on here. What's happening in my body? My heart is racing. I'm hot. What am I believing right now? I'm also trying to be kind to whatever's happening inside of me, the ouch. So we inquire what might be going on with the other person too. We can inquire as to what's going on with the other person too. Let me get back to where I was here. Finally, we can ask ourselves, what really matters here? How does this fit and connect with my intention in life? If our intention is to see, for example, that we're all interrelated, that we're all part of this same thing, that we all have some form of these same fears and angers and wants, and we can see that that my intention is to connect. And what is my intention in this particular relationship where this triggering is happening? And what is my value in this relationship? So these pauses can begin to break the habits of a lifetime. That's why they're so significant and so important. For most people, we stay in this trance until there's some kind of a crisis. And, that's another thing about this whole last year with the COVID issues, shutdown, fears, all this stuff. It was a crisis that gave us a chance to take a look and to say there's no need to rush anymore. There was nothing to rush about much. And it's about finding your truth and sharing your truth and inquiring into other people's truths. So, let's see, I wrote myself a note here. I want to see what it says. So we're making I guess what this talk is asking is, can we make a commitment to let the clay that surrounds our heart, the guards that surround our heart, begin to break open, so that we can feel and experience and share, that idea that we're all wiser than we think we are. Can we share that wisdom without being embarrassed about it, or without a sense of shame, or to the extent that fear and doubt and shame and all come up, to offer ourselves compassion, be brave, and have the courage to move through, and it won't, and every relationship probably won't survive, because it takes two people to make a relationship. But sometimes just our own pausing and our own kindness and our own open-heartedness can work to break through to another person. So just a little bit more here. So one way to look at this is that one of the other things that happens in relationships is a power struggle. Happens in intimate relationships, it happens in business relationships, and in a number of relationships where you're in close communication with other people. So the question is, can we let the power of love overcome the love of power? Can we find that balance, at least, between caring and loving and committing and understanding, compassion for the pain we feel and the pain that other people feel, in order to move through that, to find that balance. So it's and it's not just about what we say, it's about how we communicate. So it's how we listen too, and the power of listening. In therapy, in couples therapy, or working with couples, one of the best techniques that I thought I worked with people about, that I thought was effective, was to, especially when people were having a hard time listening to each other, was to ask them to take turns to say their truth, and then the other person to tell them what they heard. And that discussion going back and forth until there was an agreement that the person, not that they agreed, they don't have to say, you're right and I'm wrong, but this is what I heard, is this correct? And once you get that, then you have a chance, the other person has a chance to speak their truth. And this requires two people who are committed to trying to understand each other. And you don't always have that, but it's worth remembering. And if you're listening to somebody, you can just say that. Is this what you mean? Oh, I just want to make sure I understand. So we don't have to be the bully or the doormat. I like the term to be a tender-hearted warrior. There's a nonviolent assertiveness is another way to talk about it. And as we develop relationships, we're developing, deepening, and refining the truth we can tell each other. So that's how you know that you're onto a good relationship, or that a relationship still has juice and power, is that you keep working on deepening and refining the truth that you're willing and able to tell each other. So, and in so doing, when we can do this with love and caring and compassion, we're breaking down not only our own self-delusion and isolation, but that for the other person that we're relating to. And we're also discovering our own complexity. It's this, we are so complex. That's one of the things that I just keep being amazed by. And who we are is very complex, and we can't pin it down to this story or this one sentence. We're a lot of things. So here's a little piece by Adrienne Rich, and then I'll open it up for our discussion. An honorable relationship, that is one in which two people have the right to use the word love, is a process, delicate, violent, often terrifying to both persons involved, a process of refining the truths they can tell each other. It's important to do this because it breaks down self-delusion and isolation, and we do justice to our own complacency. And it is important to do this because we can count on so few people to go through that hard way with us. Okay, that's enough from me for now. So just, I'm going to stop this recording so that you